So again, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. I want to begin our conversation with something I know we're all getting fatigued with, which is talking about COVID, but it was such a moment for all of us to figure things out. How did you get through that 4 year time period approximately, and how has it changed the way that you approach things now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I was living in Stockholm in Sweden, and my son was here, and his mother had no one to babysit him. So I came back and I lived with just my son and I just together for almost 6 months. And we were very concerned. Nobody knew what the story was, and nobody knew, if this was transmitted, just nobody understood it. So we were ultra conservative. And I just spent literally the 6 months with one person. He was 7 years old at the time, and I never thought I would do that. I don't think I'll ever do that again. Uh, but it was an amazing time in retrospect because we just had this connection that I'm sure I'll never have again with anyone. And one of the things that came out of that was a short book called Two Goats that I wrote with the same illustrator as this book called Election Day that I meant to talk to you about. And Two Goats is just about these two goats, big goat and little goat, who live on a little farm and are trapped sort of in this farm and can't get out. And so that was the first book I did with this really incredible illustrator who wrote this other book that I'm working on now called Election Day.
It's interesting. I found a book. One of my guilty pleasures is to go to Dollar Tree and find the books that they have there that may have been overprinted or whatever. And I found one about COVID. It was a kid's book, and it was fascinating. And it was about how the world was just empty. All of a sudden, one day, everything was empty. And it was really talking about that longing that we have for humans. And it's so interesting to see all of these things that we lived through for that 4 year window becoming art and becoming a part of, what we're memorializing, which was this time that was so strange on the planet.
That's something kind of fascinating actually, because I think that people say that there was nothing like this that happened prior in anybody's memory. Like the last time this happened was during the Spanish flu, which was 1918 or something around there.
Yeah.
And there's so many documents of World War One. Everybody's got a book and how it just changed fundamentally thinking about what humans were and what technology was. But there's very little that's actually a product of the Spanish flu culture.
True.
So what I tried to think about what that stuff might be, and I reread this book called The Plague from Albert Camus, which is, it's not about the Spanish flu exactly, but it's about the plague that comes to this little French town and how it takes over the town, and they have this quarantine, and everybody's locked up, and everybody's getting sick, and anyway, it's in the spirit of Camus, so it's very sort of existentialist, and it's a great book, but there aren't that many documents of compared to, say, World War One, which is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Although the Spanish flu killed 25 million people,
Yeah.
which was enormous, right?
Yeah.
But so I was kind of curious if much would come out of COVID,
Yeah.
just as far as the documenting of that time,
Yeah.
you know?
And that's why I began the conversation with I know we're fatigued by it. And I think there's a part of people that are like, there needs to be kind of a separation point before we get flooded with all the art. But at this point right now, everything that we're digesting, most of the things that we're digesting has been because we lived through that. And whether it's, like not right in your face and on the underbelly, it's still a part of what we're consuming. It's our daily artistic creative diet.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's underappreciated. Also, they're still talking about a little bit in economics. They're saying, oh, we had to, put all this money out there and it caused inflation. Then now everybody's talking about inflation as a political thing. So it's definitely kind of there, but it's sort of in the background,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know.
for sure. Well,
Uh,
let's dive into what you do on a daily basis right now. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day, and one of the curious kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
yeah, I guess I have to say I'm a writer and artist, and try to encourage kids to do that. And it used to be, I would say this, I'd say it used to be one of those things that parents say, oh no, go be go learn how to be a programmer. That's how you get ahead in life if you want a job. But now you've got this guy, Jensen Huang from NVIDIA. NVIDIA, it's like the largest company in the world now by market cap.
Yeah.
And they're creating these chips and there's this AI. And Jensen Huang is just saying to everybody who will listen, whatever you do, don't become a programmer because AI is going to handle all of that. So what you really should be doing now is you should be doing, art, you should be doing music, you should be engaged in reading and in writing, because that's actually going to be again relevant in a way that it hasn't been probably for the last 50, really my lifetime, 50, 75 years. It's been so about tech and about STEM.
Yeah.
So, for these third graders, I'd say, you're hearing a lot about tech and a lot about STEM, but it may be up to you to figure out what your life is. And for that, you're going to need to know more about music, more about art, more about reading. And I think actually that's where the future is, really. And I think people have forgotten that because if you look back more than about, 200, 250 years, it was all literature and theology and astrology. There was no cotton gin, there was no inventions or anything. It was all just the humanities.
Yeah.
So it may turn out that we just live in this period right now where we have a lot to do with technology, but that the future looks a lot more like the past as of 200 years ago. So I guess that's the direction I would take it.
It's interesting you say that because I thought when COVID was happening, having a jazz radio show, I thought there might be this level of reversion back to the early days of jazz and before it was electronic, when it was just like purely just the instruments and, swing and the early era. And it didn't go there. I think it's still a hip thing for a lot of the youth when they do discover jazz. But I was thinking overall, just like you said, there would be a reversion back because that's genuinely human made and there's a soul, there's an emotion, because the more we get into AI, the more I think we're going to discover that it's artificial, it's not like truly human. Like I can look at artwork now and I can tell real quick whether it's AI driven or not. I can,
Yeah.
and I think most of us are going to get to that point.
I spent a lot of time in New Orleans, which uh, I guess was in some ways the birthplace of jazz, right?
Yeah.
And so I lived there for 15 years before I lived in Portland. And what they did during COVID, I wasn't there then, but I visited a couple times sort of by the end of it, and they had these porch concerts. I don't know if you heard
Right.
about this.
Yeah.
So, people would go around, it's kind of this neighborhood type place anyway, where people spend a lot of time outdoors on their porches. So it wasn't that hard for people to do that. And they just, and the weather was, usually pretty good. So they get these musicians and everybody, be blowing, which, you don't want to do during COVID, but they'd be on a porch
Yep.
and usually a Victorian porch. So it's kind of a nice setting and all around the grass and, even across the street and in the middle of the street, because nobody was driving, they just had these crowds of people. And that was one way that they kept that alive in
Yeah.
New Orleans because it was a hard time for musicians, especially because they couldn't perform and there was a lot of that kind of Zoom concert stuff, but I didn't
Yeah.
really get into that. But so I thought New Orleans had this great response, these porch concerts.
Yeah, they certainly did. Yeah, and I interviewed a lot more musicians over that time period, and that was happening all over the place. There was even in Kansas City, they would have these things called Plex Pod shows, and it was on a parking lot, and you would pull up and raise the trunk of your car, and everybody was separated, and they would be up on a stage, and it was really cool. So there's more than one way to cook an omelet, that's for sure. You know?
I think people need that. I mean, that
Yeah,
was there are plenty of people who just I almost never see some of these people in New Orleans,
yeah,
during the normal times, but all of a sudden you find out, oh yeah, you're coming out, you're one of our neighbors.
uh-huh. I know. Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
other interesting. So, talk to me a little bit about Election Day. We're barreling our way into another very historic election. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, well, I wrote this book in part because it just seemed like it was such a politicized environment, so partisan, and there was just this feeling that we need to do something other than just stand and yell at each other or yell at the television.
Yeah,
So the idea was to bring some comic relief to the situation. Um, it's a Where's Waldo book, except for that instead of just one character that you follow, it's an entire neighborhood. And the book is the day of the election itself. So it starts in the morning at 8 a.m. when the polls open, and it ends at night at 8 a.m. I'm sorry, 8 p.m. when the polls close. And as you flip the pages, you discover what these individuals are doing on that day, what all these 15 people are doing.
Yeah.
And so it turns out they're doing all kinds of different things, but not as many of them are voting maybe as we'd like,
Yeah.
you know. So
That's interesting.
that's the idea of the book.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, talk to me a little bit about how you got here. Take me back to where you were born and raised. How did politics and writing and how did all of this become your focal point?
Well, I grew up in San Francisco. My parents were hippies, and they taught us a lot about civic responsibility. But what now that I have a son, I wasn't sure. Things are so different, and I wasn't sure how to explain this to him. And this really came home to me one day when he said, "There's all this talk about elections. Why don't they just make Superman president, and then that'll take care of everything?" You know, and I thought first, oh, that's a really good idea. Like they should do that. And then I realized that I probably could turn this into some kind of a lesson. So I said, well, really how it is everybody in the neighborhood is kind of like a Superman. They have this superpower. It's called voting. And I think he started to understand that. And at that point, I just thought I had to write a book that put this all together. So
Yeah.
that's the genesis of it. It's kind of a misunderstanding in a way. Yeah.
I used to I was kind of jokily thinking about I don't know 8 years ago they should just make a huge iPad that sits on the desk in the Oval Office and that's the president. If you need something, you just go in, you ask it. It's this figurehead. It can be put up on a pole and it can go to press conferences and we have like the ultimate, bipartisan hero for our government representation. So it might be fun, but
That's a great idea. Yeah, it could be like you could have a different message for everybody he's talking to, you know?
exactly.
It would be just like now, except it'd be better.
Yeah, exactly. It totally would be. So talk to me a little bit about heroes. Who have been heroes for you in your life?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because my heroes are, I guess, mostly are literary. As far as I've read a lot of literature, and I think for this specific book, Mad Magazine was this is a kind of if you like Mad Magazine, if you like The Simpsons, if you like Family Guy, this is like that, but it's almost uh, a little bit more ridiculous in a way because it's just completely focused on something that's it's coming ahead. But I think people with Mad Magazine they usually focus on the questioning of authority or this sort of irreverent humor. But Mad Magazine, for me at least, was more than that because it kind of taught me what was absurd, not only about everybody else and everything else, but also about my own life. And in that sense, I think it taught me how to think. And I wanted to bring that forward now because I don't think people are really seeing the absurdity in the situation that we're in, right? There's nothing that they really they don't realize how ridiculous not only what people are saying is, but also what they're doing, how ridiculous that is. And even I think the late night comedians who like to make fun of Trump, I think it's gotten a little tiring because it's always the same thing, and Trump's kind of an easy target, and everybody thinks, okay, well, Trump's kind of silly and absurd, but they don't really notice that it's not just Trump, it's the whole environment that's absurd. It's absurd to go home and yell at your television set. That's absurd. Like it's absurd to think that the democracy is going to be over on November 6th if you put the wrong person in office. But they're both saying that. Both parties are saying that. Look, this is the last election. I mean, I think that kind of scaring, and I think people are just alarmed. They're afraid to talk to each other. So we wanted to kind of try to break that up a little bit.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
the one thing I realized doing podcasting is that I think we're so much more alike. We're way more aligned as human beings than the TV, the telly, the political environment. I think we are in a place that is just It's just not as dire as they make it out to be. And you're right. The whole cloud that's over the entire political machine is so misaligned and so out of touch. It's just it's clowny. And we do need satire to kind of throw some level of light because what do they say? If you don't laugh, you're gonna cry. It's like it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, here's an example. Okay, so immigration is this sort of this like third rail or whatever, right? Like nobody knows how to say about it. But then, I was just watching this guy Otani. Do you know who this guy is?
Yeah.
He's this
Oh yeah.
baseball player
Uh-huh.
from Japan.
Yeah.
He's an immigrant, right?
Yeah.
And nobody wants Otani to go back to Japan.
Right.
Nobody's like, nobody wants that, right? And nobody
Right.
wants, Sergey Brin, like this guy that put Google together to just, oh, we don't need that guy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of consensus about the need for migration, and yet it's this thing where, no, you guys,
Yeah.
no control. So I think we kind of focus on those weird little things that are really fine tuning, whereas what you're saying, the overall picture is there is a lot that we agree about, and we're
Yeah.
just focused on these wide out opinions.
Yeah.
You
What
know,
was the first book that you read that really made an impact? One of your favorite books?
you know, I'm trying to think what would be an example. I think one of the things I really liked was Hesse's Journey to the East,
Yeah.
which is a kind of an obscure book. I mean, people know Hesse, they know Siddhartha, they know Damien, but Journey to the East is a less well-known book. But I liked it a lot because it's a story of um, a a mine. Actually, it's a pilgrimage. There's a bunch of monks going on a pilgrimage. There's sort of a minor figure named Leo, and Leo is a cook, and everybody likes this guy Leo, but he's very low down on the hierarchy of these monks. And it turns out that when Leo leaves this group that's traveling, the group kind of falls apart, and everybody kind of falls into obscurity, and the whole pilgrimage is lost. And it turns out that this guy who nobody really took too seriously was really the core of this mission without it being known or explicit. And it has this kind of mystical character of the Journey to the East. But I think that's one of these books that it has this kind of iconic somehow meaning for me that I keep coming back to.
So talk to me a little bit about what is your motivation every day to create these stories and to and to do the work that you do? What is the motivator for you every day?
That's a really good question. I think some people, I mean, I'm not sure I would want to give this or recommend this for others because it's a bit like uh, um, it's a political difficult word to use, but like a master who's sort of forcing me to do things. I don't feel like I'm ever quite myself unless I'm making something.
Yeah.
And so like I say, I'm a little driven for this, but I'm not sure if it's a blessing or a curse in a real way because I don't have the calm and sort of happy life that I want. I always have to be making something, or I feel like I'm not alive in a way. And I don't know if other people describe this to you, but that's how it feels to me. So I feel very disappointed in myself when I just am doing things that I should be content with and happy with, and I'm not. I want to make something. I want to bring something out. I want to transform the world just a little bit and get other people interested in that. So it's like I say, I'm not sure it's a great attribute, but I think that's what it is.
Yeah. So of everything that you've done in your life and accomplished and become, what are you the proudest of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually think, and this is a bit of a cliche because it is my son, but I'm probably most proud of that work. It's a lot harder than other things, but there is a creative element. So every morning when I wake him up, I always invent a story because he doesn't like to get up, and so I just invent something. This morning was a story about these little um, these little mussels that live in the water, and they can't get out of the water. and I'm trying to get them out of bed. So it's like, how are they going to get out of the water? And they all get together and they jump on each other and they finally one gets to the top and they get out of the water. A lot of it doesn't make any sense, but just doing that every day is something, and watching how that evolves in him, I think is something I'd say I'm the most proud of at this point.
So speaking of youth, if you had a dream tonight, ran into a younger version of you, an 18-year-old version, you can give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've lived, the wisdom you gained along the way. What advice would you give your young self?
I think that I wasn't as courageous maybe as I could have been. I really was, despite all this talk of Mad Magazine, I was going to bring up Kafka. I think I was just a little too conventional. And that's a surprise because I really was around a lot of people who broke the mold, and I had plenty of examples of people who were artistic and artists. My sister's a is a musician. I have a brother who's a juggler, and it's not just them. It's also friends of mine and people in the neighborhood. But I think I was a little bit more hesitant. I sort of thought that you need to make money, you need to have a career, and I think I've slowly learned that a lot of those concerns are really um, inhibiting in the idea that you can pursue something that you want to pursue. And I know that's not very popular. There's this guy who's a professor at NYU, and he talks a lot about how, if you want to be successful in life, you should buy a cleaning service that's failing, and you should knock on people's doors, and you should offer to clean their carpets, and get this book of carpet cleaning, and then you'll be able to put some money in your bank account. And I just think it might be true for some people, but for anybody who has any creative leaning, that's just the wrong direction to take. And I think there are a lot of voices that call us to do that. Certainly, there were enough for me. So that's what I would say is, take risks, and don't be afraid to try something, because there's lots more time to come. And as we said earlier, I mean, we don't really know where the AI is going to lead us, and
Yeah,
technology is not necessarily going to make what's relevant today what's relevant tomorrow.
yeah,
I mean, there are these guys that just go and study, a single software program so they can get a job at Disney,
yep.
and then Disney decides we're not going to use that software program anymore. I mean, that's the kind of thing that just you want to say there might be more and more things that look like that. So we have to come back to ourselves, and I think we can invent. We have more that we can invent, and trust ourselves to take risks.
Yeah, for sure. So at the end of the day, everyone sees you in a different light. Family, friends, all of your readers, everyone around you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be stable, a stable parent, but I think even that's overrated, right? It's all these people trying to be stable parents, and they're all standing around talking about how it's important to get back to their work, and to me, all that is sort of a. I mean, I know it's important to do that, so I want to do that too. But I also think it's important to have fun, and so I want to be someone. I'll tell you what I want to be. I'm not sure who I am, but I want to be someone who has fun whenever I can, and is willing to stay up another hour and not worry so much about what's coming, because we're here right now, and
Yeah,
it's important to be here more than it's important to promise to be somewhere tomorrow or the next day or the next week or the next year.
yeah, for sure. So
Yeah.
if anyone wants to pick up a copy of Election Day or Two Goats or delve into your world further, reach out. What's the best way to do that?
There's a website. It's called electiondaybook.com. And the good thing about this website is that the book itself has very few words in it deliberately, so that people can try to imagine what's happening rather than be told what's happening.
Yeah,
But it can be helpful to know that all these characters that are in the book, they're just pictures, they all have a backstory, and they all have a history. They all went to school somewhere, they're all a certain age, they have a certain political understanding. And there's the website says, tells that backstory for all these characters. So I think that makes it fun just to go there anyway. But you can order the book there. You can order it on Amazon. But I like to have people go to the website, because they also can there's also this sort of issue, which we haven't brought up yet, which is that elections in the US are not held on weekends or holidays.
Right.
And that's something that is almost unique within all the advanced countries. It's only Britain and the US that don't do this. And as a result, we don't really have a culture around voting. We don't have
Yep.
a culture around election day. And that's in stark contrast to other holidays. So, for example, if you look at the 4th of July, you have fireworks and barbecue. And if you think about Halloween coming up, we have trick or treating and costumes. And you talk about the Chiefs, even the Super Bowl's got Super Bowl snacks
Yep.
and commercials, but there's nothing like that for election day, partly
No.
because we just don't have it as a holiday. So people don't make a plan and they don't know what they're going to do. And there's no movement and shared culture around it. And that could be done with music too.
Yeah.
There could be a musical component to elections. I mean, it seems like there needs to be something that holds people together and gets people into this cornerstone of democracy and taking an opportunity, realizing how great it is to be able to vote.
That is interesting how it's totally true. And I didn't even realize that, how the rest of the world deals with it in a completely logical, different way. And we somehow just jam it in the middle of the week and say, all right, if you can get out, good. If you can't, all right, we're moving on after this 1 24-hour period. It's very weird.
Yeah, and also the fact that the U.S. is such a strange with. I mean, there's the down ballot, right? So the local elections are really important, but a lot of people complain that their vote doesn't count, and to some extent that's not untrue,
Right.
right? I mean, so we have a system could use a few
Yeah,
adjustments.
we certainly do. And it's good that it gets illuminated. So thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you taking a
Yeah,
minute out to talk about your work, and best of luck with everything.
well, yeah. Thank you for having me. It was nice to talk to you.